Now we're crossing the street. We were over there, and there's the gate to the city. And this is where we were earlier. So now the fort is technically a state. It's ran by the park rangers, so it's technically like a state park. And you have to pay to get in, but you can walk around the outside of it for free. You just have to pay to get in to walk around. So we will do that here in a minute. But this was the grounds of the fort, and these were barrier walls that sort of helped them defend. There would have been different cannons, outposts, whatnot. And this is the fort. Castillo. So this would have been an entranceway into the fort, and the fort had a moat at one point, and since has been drained out. And these turrets that you see up there, there would have been a person in there with flintlock or a parrot gun, which is basically like a sawed-off shotgun that shoots large pellets out of it for enemies that came too close to the fort. And then this is where the moat would have been, down here. Now this fort was originally built by the Spanish in the 1500s. And I'll tell you more history about it in a minute. But it is one of the few forts that I believe, if I'm not mistaken, so you can see where they would have shot through there. If I'm not mistaken, it's one of the very few forts that was never actually taken. It was given up each time. The Spanish gave it to the English as part of a treaty during the French Indian Wars. And that was part of the treaty that the English signed with the Spanish and the Indians, that they got to keep this fort. So when the Spanish left, this fort and St. Augustine, which would have been, you know, back in the 1500s, these would have been old buildings to the city with a city wall around it that basically protected it. And when the Spanish left it to the English for part of that period, then they basically abandoned the entire city and left everything. So the English got here and there was absolutely nothing. They took all of the provisions, they took everything. There was nothing here but basically an empty city. And as you can see, all of the cannons up there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around the outside of the fort first and sort of give you a visual of that, and then we'll go ahead and go inside. Since it's a state park, I want to say it's about $8 or $9 US to go in. I've been in once before, but for your benefit, I will do it again because it's a pretty cool thing to see. So I'll get back to you here in a second. But hey guys, so I'm walking near the fort wall, so you can kind of see how tall it is compared to me. It's, I want to say it's like 22 feet or 30 feet or something like that. But anyway, so I'm walking along the outside of it. And this right here is actually a blast furnace. And this is where they made the cannonballs. So they would pour the hot metal in here, heat up the cannonballs in there, sorry. And then they would roll down to the other side. And then they would pull them out and they would shoot the flaming hot cannonballs out of the cannon there at the ships in the harbor. So, now there's some cool history. I'll tell you about this part first. Because there's like groups of kids. There's groups of kids, you know, school kids and stuff coming by every so often. So, anyway, I don't know if you see this. This fort is actually made out of what's called coquina. It's basically crushed shell that they mined off of Anastasia Island, and when you pack it together, it creates a solid concrete. Now, the thing is when they would shoot cannonballs at this, the cannonballs would literally just stick, and then they would just fall right off onto the ground. Now, you may see all of these little holes here everywhere. They line the whole wall all the way down. And this is the only wall that really has this much shot at it. You can see it up there. So what happened is Pedro Menéndez caught French Argonauts sneaking through the other side of the fort, away from the bay, through the swampland that was out there, basically, and they were trying to sneak through in the middle of the night to take over or attack the fort. I believe it was Pedro Menéndez. I could be wrong with that. But anyway, it was one of the commanders of the fort. I'm pretty sure it was Pedro. So, anyway, he caught them before they were able to invade, and he captured them all. And none of them would provide him with any information, and he swore that he was going to make the bay out there go blood red with their blood if they did not give up any information. So that's basically what he did. He lined them all up and shot them all. That's why you have all of these musket ball holes everywhere. So he lined all of them up. I believe there was 50 of them. 50 of them or 75 of them or somewhere along there. Lined them up on this wall and shot them all. Then, as if that wasn't enough, he took each one of their bodies personally out to the bay. So he took them out to the bay, which I'll show you here in a second. And out here on the shore, he proceeded to decapitate every single one of them and throw their heads into the water. And supposedly the folklore says is that the entire bay turned red with the French Argonauts' blood. So it's a pretty crazy story. So anyway, just to tell you a little bit about basically the let me try and get out of the sun a little bit over here. So basically, construction began on the fort in 1672, and it was completed. Hey guys, not sure what happened, but the camera stopped filming, so I don't know. So I'm going to start over. I'm walking around the fort still. I'm walking through the moat part, and it's actually still a little wet. And I think it might be wet from a hurricane that came through a few months ago. But anyway, the fort was constructed, or the construction began in 1672, and then it was finished in 1695. Now, obviously, there's been some additions and things like that over time that people have owned it, but basically the Spanish owned it through that time frame. And then in 1763, the Treaty of Paris, that was when Spanish turned it over to Britain. And then from there, it became the capital of Britain in East Florida. So this was actually a British capital at one point. And then it was also returned back to Spain in 1783. And then with the Treaty of Adams-Onis, it was then in 1821 returned back to the United States, because we obviously became a country in 1776. So it became part of the United States at that point. Now, some cool things that I found out was that this fort actually housed as prisoners Seminole Indians and Apache Indians from the Seminole Indian Wars. The first Indian Wars held Seminole Indians here, and then the second Indian War held Seminoles and also Apaches, and also Chief Osceola was here, so that's pretty cool. And then in 1861 was when Florida seceded from the Union, and as we all know, we periled into here in the States into our own Civil War, and they seceded from the Union. Now, all of the Union soldiers left except for one guy, and that one guy stayed here at the fort until the Confederates showed up. And when the Confederates showed up, he requested a receipt of transaction for the fort to turn it over to the Confederates. And he would not leave. He refused to leave until they gave him that receipt. Now, we weren't technically at war yet, so the Confederates gave him a receipt on paper, and he walked off and left the fort. So it's pretty crazy. And then, so then after that, in 1862, the Union took it back after a lot of fighting, but in a year. So the Confederates only had this fort for a year. So they didn't have it very long at all. But anyway, I got a ticket. It's $10 for adults to get in. So I got a ticket. So we're going to go into the fort and we're going to look around real quick. And then I will get back to you guys shortly as soon as we get into the fort. I'm not sure I can get into the fort walking all the way around the moat though. So this is sort of what it looks like walking around the moat. And there would have been cannons and defense systems and all that stuff up there. So I think I will just turn around and go back the way I came. There's other walls up there where you can defend from. So the enemies had to, you know, scale one wall if they got that close, and then into another wall, which then at this point this was filled with water, which it's still really wet at the moment. I keep slipping around everywhere. But let me make my way around here and I'll get back to you guys in a minute. And I'll show you I'll show you the inside of the fort, where the quarters are and all that. You can hear it squishing under my feet. Okay guys, get back to you in a second. This is walking into the fort. Fort Castillo.
We have to take it to the
I know he had somebody else looking at it.
This would be the courtyard of the fort and the main entrance. And we'll go upstairs. Those are barracks. I'll show you guys those in a few minutes.
5. I prefer the over regular snow.
And this would be the top, the defense spots. And that's the bay. It's called Matanzas Bay, I believe. And down there is where I was with the wall, where he shot the Argonauts, and the blast furnace that was created during the Civil War. And we'll explore a little bit more around here. Now the cannons used to sit on top of these platforms. This is a bastion. It's that tower there and a little strut that sticks out. 1740, the century rang the alarm whenever he saw a puff of smoke from enemy cannons across the bay. It was the signal for prayer. Only 2 men in the fort were killed during the 27-day bombardment. So this fort, like I said, was basically impregnable. The siege of 1740. Thorpe, Georgia, about to take St. Augustine or leave my bones before its walls. The Spanish governor Manuel de Cendoya vowed in turn to shed his last drop of blood in defense of the town. Neither had to keep their vow. Oglethorpe's artillery bombarded the fort for 27 days, but could do little damage. Unable to capture the fort by force, the English withdrew. So that's one of the good things about this coquina, is it absorbs cannonball shots and musket shots and so on and so on. So imagine back in the 1700s looking out over this bay, and out that way is where the ocean comes in, the Atlantic Ocean, and it feeds into this bay. And over there is also St. Augustine. It's part of St. Augustine, and the island out there. And as you can see, it's kind of marshy on that island over there. So there's a lot of low-lying stuff that ships could get shipwrecked on and so forth. And there's dolphins and everything that swim in this bay. But yeah, I mean, imagine 1700s and you see an enemy warship coming in to the bay shooting cannons. Alright, let's keep going. This is just a look of the quarters below. There's another cannon down there, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that cannon was recovered off of a ship out in the bay. I'll have to try and remember, look down there, but anyway, this is where the barracks were, officers' quarters, so on and so on. And more cannons. It's an old cannon that they could lift off of here. 2 guys, 3 guys, whatever. Carry it to where they needed it. This cannon here is called a mortar cannon. Usually name their cannons, but it's hard to read. But this is a mortar cannon. You can kind of see in there, there's water in there now, but the mortar cannons would shoot up high into the air and come down on top of a ship or a galleon or whatever, and bust through the decks, the top decks of the ship. So the mortar cannons were pretty crazy, and this would have been another cannon firing position. There's more cannons over here. And there's this big old mortar cannon. It's got to be a Spanish mortar cannon based on how ornate it is. $17.24. So this is another bastion. They have this blocked off, but basically there would be a man that would run in there back and forth and shoot through the 3 holes in the walls there out at anybody invading through the moat. So yeah, that cannon 1724 was constructed in Barcelona. Alright, get back to this is what the barracks would have looked like back then. You can see they try to keep it somewhat traditional. This is another barracks. So basically the soldiers who stayed here would carve ships into the coquina. And then those were British ships. British ships behind the glass. Don't know who made the carvings, but that's basically like how they would be able to tell who to fire at. And that little prison cell is locked. American flags on foreign ships. Left by former soldiers, all of them 200 or more years old.
How you doing, sir? Pretty interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
We just had the University of South Florida come in